Welcome back, everyone. It's Mr. Brain, your friendly neighborhood gaming dad, here with another video, and it is about time that I did this. It has been way past time for me to update my tier list now that we have a whopping 8 new heroes to add to it, and these I feel will change up how some of the other legendary heroes get placed. But if you don't want to listen to me ramble on about each and every one of those heroes, you can skip to the end of the video and see how the tier list stacks up. I'm going to go through these in order. So if you're looking for information about a particular hero or about some of the heroes here at the end, please feel free to skip to the part that you want to listen to. But we're going to start from the very beginning with a chemi. And a chemi, as far as epic heroes go, I'm going to put her as a B. This is me rating her against all of the rest of these heroes, including the legendaries. And as far as epic commanders go, she's one of the more powerful ones. There's only about 4 epic commanders that I would use in like Arena of Doom or in the open field if you needed to use them in a pinch. And she fits the bill nicely, giving her the ability to hit multiple targets for a solid amount of damage, adding slow to those targets and dealing increased damage to enemies with slow. And let's be honest, there's a lot of slow effects being passed around on the field nowadays. So she has a little bit increased damage, and if you pair her with another commander that does solid amounts of damage, say Lewis for example, she can really pack a punch, like surprisingly so. She's still an epic commander. She's not going to compete with a lot of other legendaries, but I feel B is a good safe spot for her. Next up, we have Sven. As you can see, the order of these is kind of weird, but for me, because Sven is more suited towards siege and less suited towards field, I'm going to put him at A. Sven is a solid rider commander. If you are rider focused, you want to pick him up because you're going to be running some rallies, and Sven is still a staple in rider rallies due to the increased damage, the higher defense stats that he has, and just all in all, he's a solid rider rally commander. He loses some of his functionality when you push him out onto the field. However, he isn't completely useless like some of the other heroes are when you pull them out of siege. So I can't in good conscience put him in S because he isn't 100% in every aspect of the game, but because he's solid at what he does, I'm comfortable at putting him at A. Next, we have Freya. Freya is also one of those 4 epic commanders that I would feel comfortable putting in the upper echelons of commanders in this game. Freya, like a chemi, can deal a solid amount of damage to multiple targets as a rider commander. So if you're rider focused and trying to find a little bit of extra oomph, you can easily run Freya and be just fine. She also has bonuses to speed, and I believe she's also one of the commanders that has the field battle talent tree, making her one of the faster commanders to use on the field. So if you needed that little bit of extra speed, especially with Archipelago Raid almost demanding people to use speed when hunting down resources, she can be very effective on the field. Again, she's not going to compete with a lot of the legendary commanders in this aspect as far as damage output or even speed from some of them, but if you need another rider commander that's decently fast, packs a solid punch for a rider commander, you can use her and be just fine. Here's an oddball, Peter. Peter, I can't in good conscience put him any higher than C. And while he does have damage output for a single target and he does have squad attack buffs, that's pretty much where his bonuses lie. He has good siege buffs, but he's not specified to any troop type, and he's far weaker than any other specialized siege commander in the game. Very early on, before you get the likes of Sven or any of the other specialized commanders for that matter, Peter can do okay for sieging shelters or towers or what have you in the very early game. Once you get to mid game, you're going to regret putting anything in Peter. If you do have something in Peter and you needed an extra bit of muscle on the field, I'm okay putting him at C for that reason, because he does have good single target damage. You can do that. I would advise against it. I'm very much a min-maxer, and Peter doesn't fit any of that for me. Russell, for me, could have been one of those commanders that gets pushed up with the other epic commanders as being solid uses. However, he starts to fall off once you get other legendary commanders, and hell, even other specialized troop commanders that will be more powerful, heal better, better for killing zombies, what have you. He does have a nice little niche in being able to increase the EXP gained for killing zombies. And if you need a frontline healer in the early game for Arena of Doom, he can fill that role, and you get his relics pretty easily thanks to Russell's event. So getting him to the point where he's usable for some of the early portions of the game, he can be really helpful there. He falls off early, and he's one of the first people that you want to get rid of. So he gets relegated to zombies really quick, and not even hive zombies, like just killing regular zombies on the map. That being said, I'm comfortable with putting him at C. Zia, I swear I slept on her for way too long. I don't think she's one of the top 4 in Epic Commanders, but because of her AoE heal, she's finding a lot of use in early game Arena of Doom teams, and she does have solid zombie stats. I believe she can hit 2 targets for damage and 2 targets for healing, which makes her a solid back row commander, or a back row secondary commander for some Arena of Doom teams that need just a little bit more survivability. But I can't in good conscience put her higher than C. So if you needed that for Arena of Doom, or if you needed just a little bit extra healing in your zombie teams, you can run her just fine. CO. I wish there was a spot between C and D. CO has one use and one use only. She leads another ranged commander in order to increase that ranged commander's damage. I'm going to hover her here until I decide. A lot of the ways that I try to use her just involve saying, hey, run CO in front of a chemi, or run CO in front of Lewis, in order to try and increase the skill damage of the secondary commander. She's supposed to be a siege commander, and I say that with air quotes because she's god-awful at it. But that primary skill increasing squad attack for long enough for it to affect a secondary commander. No, because she requires that to be effective, I can't put her any higher than D. She can't run by herself in any sense of the word. Okay. Russell. Russell needs a buff. He does. Honestly, if they made a commander With the amount of status ailments that are going around and debuffs and buffs and all of that, if they made a commander that worked off of Edward's skills and affected an AoE range, I think that would be a very viable commander to use in group combat. But because Edward only affects himself and his heal is abysmal, and I mean abysmal because it's actually lower than Liam's passive. Liam's passive heal does better than Russell's primary heal. He does have okay infantry buffs, so if you're running an infantry main, you can run him for those buffs alone. However, you're not going to get any damage output out of him, and he's not the greatest for actually tanking damage. I'm going to put him at D. Some people find a use for him. I personally don't. And on to John Sutherland. I don't think I need to explain this, and I'll go ahead and say this now. Any person in this game named John is absolutely worthless, in my opinion. There's 3 of them, and the game just failed with characters named John. They won't all be in F tier, don't get me wrong, but he definitely belongs down here. Damage, garbage. Siege skills, garbage. You shouldn't be using an epic commander for running sieges anyway. Someone else should be running the siege at that point. And he doesn't have any quality buffs for the field, so perfectly fine putting him here. Park is another one of those commanders I would put between C and D. You can get his relics pretty easily. It's not hard to awaken him thanks to Aunt Pede, and he's an okay rider commander for single targets weakening their attack and defense, and he does have okay rider buffs after that. One of his skills is locked to affecting zombies, which kind of sucks for the open field, but it's not the worst thing in the world because you need 5 teams for running zombies, and he can fit one of those teams. But unless you're going to capitalize off of that attack and defense debuff, I don't think he belongs on any other teams, in my opinion. I have seen some people use him in Bounty Ground to some effect, but personally, I'm comfortable putting him at D. Michelle, sorry, I'm not going to worry about gathering commanders. There are certain things that some of them can do, but if you're stuck to just gathering, I'm not going to worry about you. Bella. I'm happy with Bella. Bella, on her first skill alone, belongs in S tier. She's got a solid amount of single target damage, and her ability to increase damage taken by the target for about 3 seconds when she's awakened, and it's a guarantee by a certain amount for 3 seconds, means that if you follow her up with another high damage rider commander like Sven or Elena, as we'll talk about later on, she shines. She's going to do amazing. She has a nice rage buff for the beginning of combat, meaning she's not going to wait the full 10 to 11 seconds to get her first skill off. So she can actually capitalize on that rider talent tree maxed out to get that 10% damage buff, I believe it is, for the first 10 seconds of combat, and it will actually affect her skill damage and her secondary commander's damage. There's currently no other commander that can take advantage of that. And I don't think there is, unless you finagle your group fights a certain way. But no, Bella, easy S tier. Let's just go ahead and put that one here. I'm going to come over here, take that out. Jeremy, I have a use for you, but it's very niche and people kind of laugh at it. Go ahead and put that there. Save myself some time putting these weaker commanders down here. Did I miss any? Nope, I didn't. I don't think I missed any. Nano. You have good rider range buffs. you have a nice range squad attack buff with your primary skill. You are CO upgraded, as you can actually deal damage, not only with your primary skill, but with a passive skill. That damage is far outshined by every other ranged legendary in the game. Far outshined. You are a support commander for one of those. I say support, you're leading them because of that primary skill. So early on, Nakano Lewis is devastating. That gets switched up real quick when you find somebody else that can give that attack buff in another way, or can capitalize on another measure of skill damage or ranged attack damage. So, all in all, you're a B tier. I'm happy with that. Liam. Early on, the game gives you relics for Liam, and you will be stuck using him for such a significant part of the early and mid game that it's hard to get rid of him because of how easy it is to upgrade him. That being said, he's very much outshined by most other commanders in the game, including a good portion of the epic commanders. He's not a part of the 4. Just getting that out of the way. He's not a part of the 4 epic commanders that I would place higher than him, but he's up there. Good single target damage, passive healing. He makes a good off tank in Arena of Doom, but C tier is about where you'd put him, because if he leveled up with everybody else, you would neglect him pretty easily. Alex. I need like B+. I need B+ here. But I'm going to put you in B. Alex's buffs are instrumental to taking advantage of Arena of Doom in the early game, and still very useful in the open field no matter what portion of the game that you're in. 40% in attack, HP, or defense for a particular troop type is hard to overcome, especially the early game when you don't have that much of a buff. Getting to 90-100% in buffs in the early game is ridiculously hard for non-spenders, and having a character that can automatically give you a 40% buff for a good portion of the time is insane. Now, that usefulness does fall off once you can get up into the 200s and 250s and percentages later on in the game, but having that extra 40% is still nothing to scoff at, especially when he also gives himself rage so he can use his skill again more often. I'd still keep him at B tier. I don't think it's quite A tier. Rigoro, my main man. Well, Rigoro, I'm going to put you at A tier. And I will say why I'm keeping you at A tier, even though there are still a lot of commanders above you. Archipelago Raid showed me and showed a lot of my team the importance of damage mitigation over just healing it. Thunder changed the meta when he came out to focusing on healing off any damage that you possibly could. If you raised your HP enough and then were able to heal off any damage dealt to you, it was very easy to stay ahead of any rallies or open field combat that was thrown at you, because in the end you're not taking any damage other than heavily wounded on the field. Rigoro takes that and flips it on its head by saying, no, you're just not going to hurt me for a certain amount of time. And with Archipelago Raid changing up how certain fights handled heavily wounded versus lightly wounded, being able to stop damage entirely was crucial to some of our defenses. It prevented so many more deaths that we knew we shouldn't have, and allowed us to fight 3-on-1, 4-on-1 for periods of time we probably shouldn't have been able to hold. So I'm comfortable keeping Rigoro at A tier. I do hope his shield gets a bit of a buff so he can keep up with some of the new commanders that have come out, because he doesn't deal damage in a significant sense. He does have that damage buff while he has the shield on, and it does count for any shield on him, but he doesn't deal any skill damage of his own. So keep that in mind. Damage mitigation for us was very helpful. Tom, I still can't put you anywhere but S tier. And it's not your damage, it's not your healing, it's that buff. That AoE damage reduction and AoE damage increase buff that you put on everyone around you for, I believe, 3 seconds. Because damage is a late stage calculation for the damage formula, having something that can just cut that damage by 15% or increase your allies' damage by 15%, it's ridiculously powerful. I still don't know why they buffed him in the early game to add on one of those, but he's going to stay up here for as long as that stays on here. It's absolutely nuts. Hank, you're right there with Peter, only you're even more niche than Peter. Hank introduced burn damage to the game, and until recently, he was the only commander that could use it. There is some testing that I want to run with Robert for increasing burn damage on commanders who are afflicted with an HP debuff, but because your entire skill line is locked to siege, essentially, in some way, shape, or form, you only get your skill damage, and it's lower than Peter's if you're not in siege. So I'll take C, and I'll take putting you at C and be happy you're not lower. Lee, still an S tier. Reducing the enemy's HP is busted as hell. And the fact that you can not just decrease their HP, but also their attack and defense, while also dealing one of the highest amount of damage amounts in the game, you cannot ignore that. Your AoE damage, I believe, is still 5th or 6th in the game. I'd have to sit down and do the math, but that debuff kills people. It's absolutely nothing to ignore. Lewis, S tier. If you haven't figured out yet, I'm not putting anyone in SS tier until the very end. The last 3, I will pick 3 commanders from this entire list that I believe are the absolute best commanders based off of who people want to kill first. And those commanders will be put in the SS tier. So we'll get to that at the very end. So Lewis, S tier, absolutely. AoE damage is still scary in this game, and you're the only commander that doesn't give a damn where the enemy is. They just have to be close. Circular AoE, as powerful as you are, increasing your own attack power and your own skill damage, absolutely nuts. And you have one of the best rage generation passives in the game. So you're just an all-around powerhouse of damage. Just great. Jin just recently got a buff. One of his siege-specific skills got removed, and he's now a bit more viable outside of rallies than he was before. And some of his even rally and active skill got buffed as well. Because of this, I'm comfortable putting Jin in the A tier now. That I've seen that buff get used in a way that Jin can be secondary to avoid using his absolutely atrocious talent trees, so that his buff, his 5-second buff, lasts long enough to get back to the primary commander's skill damage. It's nuts that you can make something like that happen, but because his buff lasts so long, if you can keep your skill cycle down to 6 seconds, it'll work. And that's an attack and defense buff of 55% now. on top of a passive buff of 17%, I believe, and having one of his capacity buffs not be locked to rallies. So all in all, it's solid troop buff, and having him in the open field with over 70% in attack and defense buffs for all troops makes him pretty sustainable on the field, which you can't say for a lot of commanders like that. Comfortable putting him in A. Because he doesn't do any skill damage, I won't put him any higher. Jaden. Only reason I'm putting Jaden in B is for two reasons. One, you get his relics for free. If you play the game, you go through the memory store, you can get his relics for free. I would advise awakening him as soon as possible, because if you are a troop-specific commander, Jaden has a spot on your team for reason number 2, that defense debuff. Trying to increase your commander's damage is crucial for Arena of Defense or for open field to try and get a little bit more out of your weaker commanders, or any of your commanders really. So having I believe it's 30 or 35% debuff to defense makes certain that your secondary commander's skill damage is going to pack that much more of a punch. Other than that, not a lot going for him. He's got a small attack and defense buff, I believe, in his passives, but that's about it. Comfortable in B. Maxine. She's not F tier. She does solid damage. The rage debuff is kind of nice. Outside of that, nothing. I believe she does as much damage as Nano, but because she does nothing else, I can't put her up there with that. She is still primarily a gathering commander. Does have buffs for engines if she does get in a fight, but chances are if you're stuck with engines, you're not stuck with a full march of engines. Or cars, if you call them. But D tier, perfectly fine. Adut. Adut I put in A tier last time, because at the time she did not have a solid pair with infantry. Now there are at least 3 choices for running her with other commanders to make the most of that sweet infantry attack damage. For that, I'm comfortable putting her in the S tier now. When she was alone and didn't have anyone else to work with, I couldn't in good conscience put her any higher than A tier, but now that I believe it's 40% on the field, 44% after a certain amount of time, and pairing her with a couple of other commanders can push that infantry attack well over 100% on just her alone. Hell, her own talent trees can push her over 100% infantry attack by herself. So yeah, for infantry mains, that sweet infantry attack damage. Cannot ignore it. Happy to put her in S tier. Jesus Christ, almost 30 minutes into this video, and we still have a few more to go. Peggy. The upgraded Peggy. I still get her stuck with hive minds every now and then, but the primary use for Peggy now is getting her awakened so you get a 10% bonus to your construction speed. Everything else is kind of moot point. I don't see a lot of use for her outside of that. Catherine. Catherine's not as good as Bella or or Elena for that matter, but she is better at damage than other rider commanders. I'm stuck between S and A for her. Skilled, as far as just straight skill damage is concerned, she's one of the best for single target in riders anyway. High single target skill damage, good rider squad attack buffs. When paired with Cynthia, has a couple of additional buffs like the Calamity Sisters and all of that, and has a really nice rage generation passive, but it's not as consistent as Lewis's. But just based on probability alone, if it goes off once, it cuts your skill cycle by a second, at least a second. I'll see if I change my mind on this later, but I'm going to put her in A, and I'm also going to put Cynthia in A. Cynthia is far weaker than Catherine. Cynthia gives a healing buff for Catherine when they're paired together. She's a lot faster. Cynthia combined with Bella makes for one of the fastest rider teams in the game. And I have seen some people run a Cynthia Bella or other rider teams with specialized armaments during Archipelago Raid to great effect. But in terms of raw power for the open field, Cynthia is not going to do as well as some others. She's a hit and run, get in, get out, and go home kind of rider commander. So comfortable putting her in A, but because she is as fast as she is, I'm not going to put her any lower. Martin. I still use Martin, and as much as I want to switch him out as an infantry main, I can't in good conscience do it, because he is an infantry main, an infantry commander in everything but name. He's got a small amount of damage, he's got great heals, he's got a solid defense buff whenever he's healing. All the staples of an infantry commander without the title. But there are commanders that do what he does better. Tom, for example, does what he does better. Tom Martin is still one of the pairs that I will suggest to people in early Arena of Doom, even if they're underdeveloped, because of their healing and sustainability on the field. But Martin by himself, you can use him. He does have one other niche in the fact that he has the highest EXP gain for zombie kills in the game. If you need to level up somebody quickly, put someone with Martin and go kill zombies. That's a good way to gain experience while not having to spend in the game. But Martin, damage output, healing, and all of that is a subpar by itself, so I'm comfortable putting him in B. Charlie. I want to put Charlie in a B plus rank. For one reason and one reason alone. It's that rage generation. His damage is solid. Hits up to 5 targets for up to 4,000 or 4,400 damage, something along those lines, making him one of the higher damage dealing commanders in the game, the highest epic commander damage in the game. But it's that 50 rage per target hit that really makes the difference with Charlie. 250 rage right off the bat makes sure that, along with good talents, which Charlie has, whatever you're trying to do, he can do it faster. As soon as you see Charlie on the field, he almost gets killed immediately because he's squishy compared to legendary commanders. But even if you put him as a secondary for another commander that you need to pop off, so to speak, he does that job very well. Very well. But there are still other commanders that can give rage, can deal damage, or whatever need to be done, and not die as quickly. But that rounds out the 4 epic commanders that I think are in the top of the epic commanders list. Between these 4, you can still use them at so many points of the game. You can't really go wrong with them. Chune. Chune's a tricky one. Chune's right here at S and A. Chune's single target and 2 target damage is one of, if not the best in the game. She has a very high skill damage in her active skill. It's a 25% damage buff whenever she hits a single target, or she can just deal that 12,000, or I think it's 13,200 when awakened, to 2 targets, which is absolutely ridiculous. Not many AoE damage dealers can deal that much damage. But that 1200 rage requirement sucks. Absolutely sucks. Having to wait an extra 2 seconds in order to get a skill off kills your damage output. She's got a very niche silence that doesn't work consistently. It does come with a bit of rage generation, but it requires her to be hit by a skill, and let's face it, you don't want her to be hit by a skill. If you can control the field, then Chune can help you clean it up. If you're trying to get into the open field with Chune, you're gonna run into problems. I think because of that, I'm gonna put Chune at A. Now, take this one with a grain of salt. I know plenty of people are gonna disagree with me on that one, because I'm an infantry main talking about a ranged commander. So, if you believe she belongs in S, let me know in the comments. Tell me why. Thunder, easiest choice in the world. Thunder is the commander that changed the meta for the rest of the game. Still has. Like, Thunder changed garrisons to what they are up until today. If you weren't running a Thunder on your garrison, you were going to be targeted in whatever you were trying to defend, whether it be a tower, a checkpoint now. They were looking for garrisons that didn't have Thunder in order to try and hit them. Some things changed with Archipelago Raid, but Thunder is still such an imposing force that unless you know exactly who you're up against, just having Thunder in a tower can change the minds of people trying to rally it. His heals are the best in the game, very solid infantry buffs, great damage buff for his allies, good damage reduction in his passive skills while he's garrisoning. Just all in all, a great infantry commander. Now, we're on to the second John of the list, John Carrie. And I'll explain this. Carrie had one job. He was a part of the ranged commanders that came in directly after Thunder, who were supposed to shut down Thunder. Between Chune and Carrie, they were supposed to create a rally that could defeat Thunder. They failed. Like, miraculously failed. You had to be so much more over-leveled than Thunder to be able to beat him. And when they first came out, there weren't armaments. So you were trying to just face Thunder with a flat Thunder versus a flat Chune Carrie. Wasn't going to do it. It just wasn't. Even with the additional bonus of ranged hitting infantry, wasn't enough. Chune has her own damage. Chune can silence, has good ranged buffs. Carrie, not as much. Unless he's hitting a target that can heal, his skill damage is really weird. The fact that you have to make it last at least 11 seconds to get the most out of it, and it isn't even the highest in the game. On top of not hitting a healing target, completely killing half of his active skill, you can get away with not investing in Carrie and be fine. Even as a ranged commander, you can be fine. Bianca. I hope I don't have to explain this one. We're on to the list of new commanders now. As you can see, the pictures changed because I had to manually put them in. Bianca's buff changed. It changed the open field. So many people started running her immediately after she came out that I saw her face more than I saw Thunder's. There, you get the staples out there of like Bella, you get a bunch of Lewis's out there, Chune's out there, a couple of Auden and Catherine's and Aduts and Thunders, whatever popped out there. And then Bianca comes around, and every other goddamn march had Bianca in it somewhere. Because that buff, being an attack and a defense buff for 4 seconds, and gives rage to your surrounding allies, the rage can be stacked. You could have 4 Biancas hit the same target for the additional 60 rage, and that's just 240 rage on top of it. I mean, I've tested that. The buff itself doesn't stack. Thankfully, I believe that it avoids trying to stack it on a target that already has it, but that rage can be. You can keep stacking that rage bonus all you want to. So having extra Biancas on the field isn't a bad thing. She's got some passives to help her survivability and increase her attack, and she's got a really nice AoE shield that can help block a single basic attack. It's not a lot, but I think it's just over 2,000 damage factor, which will block about a standard attack against you. But no, she's wonderful. I love her to death. I will be awakening her as soon as humanly possible. Eddie. Eddie has a job to do, and he does it well. He is an infantry commander that can run rallies effectively. If you need a rally that can take a hit and dish that damage back on infantry, Eddie is your man. And because only a half of his skills are one half of one skill is locked to siege, I love him. The only problem that I currently have with Eddie is one of his best skills is counter damage. And let's be honest, if you see Eddie on the field, what is your likelihood of hitting him? Knowing that he's going to hit you back harder than you hit him, unless it's with skill damage. It's kind of slim. It's honestly, it's weird saying that a passive skill of his makes him less effective despite it being as powerful as it is. But you need to be able to control the battlefield in order to get him hit so that he's doing everything he needs to be doing. Granted, he does have the other function of HP debuff. If you awaken him, then anytime a shield that is applied to him fades or is broken, it deals an HP debuff to 3 targets in an area around him. I believe it's in front of him. And depending on who you pair him with, that can work really well in your favor. Between Roberts, Bianca, Rigoro, and Eddie now, there's multiple ways to get shields put on you. And I think with that HP debuff, I would put him at A+, but it would be a higher end of A+. So I'll round that up to S. That HP debuff, if you can get it, if you can control who's getting targeted by that, it's really effective. Elena, arguably the single best rider commander in the game, especially for group combat. Single target riders, I think she's the highest, because against a flanked target, which means someone else is hitting her, even if she's not the one flanking, she just needs to be hitting the same target as somebody else. She's got the highest single target damage. She also increases basic attack damage by over 50% during certain portions of combat, and when that fades, it's to 30% for the other times of combat. I think there's like a very small window where there's not a bonus to basic attack damage. So between her basic attack damage, her rider squad attack buff whenever she's awakened, and all of the flanking buffs that she gets for damage make her an absolute monster in group combat for riders. I can't justify putting her any lower than S tier because of that. Jacob. I haven't seen enough use of Jacob. We moved down to Region 164 immediately after Jacob's top commander, and I still have not been able to see him in use. When I first went over him in my previous videos, going over the first look and the breakdown for him, I saw the potential of him replacing Lewis on garrisons because of the massive amounts of damage buffs that he gets. However, despite that, I haven't seen him used. Because I don't have enough information on him, I'm going to put him in A tier for now. If you disagree with me, please let me know in the comments. I want to see how well he does, because his damage buffs on paper should be absolutely broken. But I'm not seeing him. Jonathan. The last of the Johns that the game said screw you to, we have Jonathan, rider commander that came in alongside of Elena, where you have Elena and Jonathan came in together with the purpose of being counter rally commanders. So they were supposed to be designed to attack a rally that was attacking something else. So they made a commander that thrived on flank damage, since it was already going to be hit by another target. And then they gave another commander bonuses to when he's rallying another rally. Specifically that wording. He's got an HP debuff whenever he rallies a rally that is targeting something else. Because of that, he fails. He's got a solid heal if you can last 30 seconds in combat and kill an enemy. He's got the HP debuff if you're in certain areas of combat. But outside of that niche area, no. He doesn't have much use. The other rider commanders just do their job so much better than he does. And even counter rallies aren't being run with Jonathan in mind. At least not many that I've seen. Correct me if I'm wrong. Please let me know in the comments. It's still a rider commander being talked about from an infantry main's perspective. So, we're down to the last three commanders. Julia. Happy with Julia. Julia filled a position that needed to be filled with ranged commanders and being able to take a hit. God damn. Ranged were so squishy that outside of the heroes that I'll pick for the SS tier, you're just going to target anyone that deals range damage. Because they don't have any defense, they don't have any HP to speak of, they don't have any defensive buffs. Julia gave you defensive buffs. She will silence you consistently, far more consistently than Chune does. Her active skill, when awakened, just silences you and gives you additional rage so you can do it faster. She has, I believe, 80% in buffs for ranged troops, and 40% of that is in HP, its weakest stat. So while that 40% doesn't translate as well, it's still better than nothing. And she also has a neat little skill that completely negates any damage increases against her. So she's not going to take increased damage from any source. Well, I believe it's a 50% chance to negate that, so just means that if an enemy has a damage buff, or if she has a debuff increasing damage against her, she has a 50% chance to say, nah, I don't care. And she'll just take base damage from it, which is wonderful for her survivability. Now we're on to Robert. I'm biased here. Please go in the comments, tell me I'm wrong. Robert is a jack of all trades, master of none, but is still better than a master of one. Robert increases the attack power of infantry troops. He decreases the HP of enemy troops. He applies a shield to himself and an ally, and applies a burn damage to people that are hitting him. He is not the tankiest infantry commander on the field, but he does so much on the field that it is hard to ignore his presence, to the point where when I field my teams, people have learned to hit my Robert first, because I usually have it with Adut because of the amount of damage that it does. It's not something that people can ignore, especially when it's a consistent HP debuff. You can get away with not awakening Robert because the awaken skill on Robert is kind of lackluster. It increases burn damage to targets that have an HP debuff on them, which can be nice in certain situations, but requires him to be hit in order to do that. And with Robert, you're not trying to be hit. But he's got great skills. He's a good infantry commander. He's a great infantry lead. Love it. Last but not least, we have Victor. Victor is probably the most straightforward commander I've seen this game create. So many of these commanders have such weird wording that I feel that, honestly, one of the reasons I started making these videos was because the wording was so hard to understand. Victor doesn't have that problem. Active skill, I deal damage. I deal increased damage when I'm garrisoning. Passive skills, I increase this stat by this much. I increase this other stat by this much. I do this while garrisoning. I mean, that's it. He's nothing fancy about him. Also, he's got this, it's like every 10 seconds I deal an additional bit of skill damage to my enemies and an attack debuff against them if I'm garrisoning. Just, there's nothing confusing about him. As a shelter garrison commander, he is indispensable. And for heavy spending teams that are trying to scramble in order to get full infantry in a tower or a defensible position, Victor is amazing. Because all of his buffs are not troop specific, and he does a solid amount of damage while he's in place. He's not going to be better than other garrison commanders, especially infantry specific ones. But he has his job, and he does it well. And even outside of garrisons, he could be usable for dealing skill damage. Those buffs are kind of nice, and the additional skill damage from his third skill doesn't require him to be garrisoned for it to go off. So I'm comfortable putting Victor in the A tier because how straightforward he is, and he does his job. Finally, we're at the end of this, and we need to pick 3 heroes. And my criteria for those 3 heroes that are going to go into the SS tier are the ones that you should be running in group fights because of how useful they are, as well as making sure that you kill your enemy's troops that have this commander. So, first things first. I think we can all agree that Lee is still one of the top dogs in the game for changing the flow of combat on the field. If Lee is out there debuffing your enemies, then your side is going to do a lot better than it should. If you don't have Lees out there, then your enemy is probably going to overwhelm you with their own. So if you see Lee, whether he be primary or secondary, kill him. Try to hide your own, try to kill the enemies. For that reason, Bianca is right up there with him. Where Lee debuffs and damages, Bianca buffs, shields, and gives rage. Just covers everything Lee doesn't do. And does it so well that she's, honestly, I would put her tied with him on who to kill first. Between buffing your own troops by 40% or reducing the enemy's troops by 30% and dealing damage, it's hard to say who is more beneficial on the field. But I think we can agree that both of these should probably die first. Last but not least, I need to pick another hero from the S tier who is indispensable on the battlefield for dealing damage, for changing the flow of combat, and you should probably be trying to kill at your earliest convenience. And I think because of how this commander works, what he does, and the fact that he is still part of the squishiest troop type, I still have to give this one to Lewis. It's insane to me that two early game heroes can still make that much of a difference in combat between Lee and Lewis, that they can overpower enemies on their own. And I think because of that, Lewis still deserves to be up here. High AoE damage, high ranged attack, high skill damage buffs, and that rage generation that is just ridiculous. I believe it is the highest consistent rage generation buff in the game. Second to Catherine's going off more than once, or Charlie's hitting 5 targets at a time. I would say Jin is up there as well, because he gets 25 rage per basic attack, but his is only while his buff is active. Lewis's is all the time. Just having Lewis on the field for a ranged team, you know they're going to do well. Even under-leveled commanders can still run a Lewis on the field to great effect if they play it right. And because of that, if you see Lewis on the field, probably needs to die fairly quickly. And that's it. I know this video ran long. I hope you enjoyed my breakdown of all the heroes that we currently have in the game. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me on Discord or in the comments. I'll be happy to answer questions. Please, if you think I'm wrong on any of this, I'm not going to question it. Tell me I'm wrong. But with that, this is Mr. Brain, your friendly neighborhood gaming dad, signing off.